Thanks for checking out Tales from the Creek Bed. If you enjoy the show, like and subscribe. Leave a comment with how you discovered Friday the 13th and which location you'd party at. Enjoy the show. I was 10 years old in the summer of 1994, and my friends and I traveled to Camp Crystal Lake. Our mode of transportation, a parked golf cart outside an apartment complex laundromat. The golf cart may have stayed stationary, but our imaginations ran wild. My name is Jeremy Campbell. I'm an author, director, photographer, and the owner of Creek Bed Media. This is my story, Tales from the Creek Bed. Growing up in the 80s, Jason Voorhees was as much a part of regular pop culture as Hulk Hogan, Mr. T, Pee Wee Herman, Elvira, and Rambo. In fact, I was surprised that there was a movie series titled Friday the 13th. As far as I was concerned, Friday the 13th was a television series about cursed antiques that came on after 21 Jump Street, but before Star Trek, The Next Generation. I assumed the movies were called Jason. I saw my first Friday the 13th movie when I was 6. It was Friday the 13th, Part 5. It aired on the USA Network, and my cousin, who was babysitting me and my sister while the adults were out playing bingo, let us watch it. The funny thing was that we were staying in a trailer park that looked a lot like the one Reggie's brother Demon was staying in. I had no real reference to Camp Crystal Lake, so I assumed Jason lived near a trailer park resembling mine. That same year, I saw Jason Takes Manhattan on a rented VHS, and like most people who saw it, I was not impressed. I was downright bored. My interest in the Friday the 13th series began when I was 9. The release of Jason Goes to Hell did it. The year was 1993, and at that point, I was becoming a full-fledged horror fanatic. Like most kids of my generation who are horror fans, I related to the Midnight Society on Are You Afraid of the Dark and wanted a group of friends to share scary stories with. I was also more drawn than ever to the horror section of each video store I entered. I checked to see if they had every Amityville horror movie in the series. I was mesmerized by the sudden change in the house from the cover art for Amityville 3D to Amityville 4. I was fascinated by the cover of Sleepaway Camp 2. Why did this woman have Jason's mask and Freddy's glove? Were they all in the same movie? Posters for Jason Goes to Hell had gone up in the local video stores, and the commercials were all over television. It was titled as The Final Friday. Was this really the last one? And how does Jason go to hell? What finally takes him down? My young mind was a whirlwind of questions. But Friday the 13th movies were off limits. I had grown up with horror. Fright Night and The Lost Boys were regular family viewing. I was 4 years old when my entire family would gather around the television to watch Freddy's Nightmares, Monsters, and Tales from the Dark Side. But suddenly this series was off limits, which intrigued me more. One night, I was set to stay at my grandfather's house while my mom went out with my stepdad. My mom took me to rent a few movies to watch while she was out, and that was the first time I saw the cover art for the first 3 Friday the 13th films. I had seen the cover art for 4 up to 9, and still just associated the movies with Jason, the big guy in the hockey mask. But the cover art for the first movie was my first time seeing Camp Crystal Lake, the shape of a mysterious figure with the characters seeming lost in the wilderness at night. It was a revelation to me. It tells an entire story in one image. I had to know who these characters were and who, if any of them, survived. But the movie was off limits. Instead, my mom suggested I rent Pet Sematary 2 because a movie that includes zombie rape is somehow more wholesome. All the same, I ended up enjoying Pet Sematary 2, and I especially liked the scene when Edward Furlong shows up at the Halloween scene dressed as Jason Voorhees. Also, between that movie and A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, I became a Dramarama fan. But that is a story for another day. A few months later, I would meet the kid who became my best friend, and we started our version of the Midnight Society called the Horror Club. His name was Donnie. He was almost 2 years older than me, and had already seen all the Friday the 13th movies. He became not just my best friend, but also my horror movie and metal guru. My mom was so pleased that her loner son had finally made a real friend, that the forbidden movies were on the menu as proper viewing among friends. Eventually, other kids joined our ranks, and we started a ritual of meeting at each other's apartments for horror movie marathons hanging out in the creek bed behind our apartment complex, and telling each other ghost stories. Like me, Donnie and the rest of our crew were not just fascinated by Camp Crystal Lake, we were drawn to it. We would spend hours filling in the gaps in the Friday the 13th timeline. We would discuss routes Jason would have taken from Packanack Lodge on Friday the 13th, Part 2 to Higgins Haven in Part 3, and where the original Camp Crystal Lake was close to Tommy Jarvis's house. Most of all, we talked about going to Camp Crystal Lake and which girl from the movies we would take with us. During one of these discussions, Donnie suggested driving to Camp Crystal Lake. As most little boys played Army, we decided to play Friday the 13th. A golf cart was parked in stationary in front of a laundromat in our apartment complex. That would be our mode of transportation. Of course, the cart remained parked, but in our minds, we were driving down a remote country road in a sweet, brand new model Jeep Wrangler with the roof and doors removed and the stereo blasting Nirvana. First stop, we had to pick up our dates. Donnie was taken, Terry, the sexy, skinny dipper from Part 2. Next, we had to drive across town to break our other friend's date out of the halfway house she was staying in. His name was Joseph, and his date was Tina, the curvy, fun girl from Part 5. She was a resident of Pinehurst Youth Development due to her wild ways, but a good fit for a dirty mind like Joe's. My date was Robin, the curious redhead from Part 7. She lived closer to the camp, but still on the edge of town. Once our dates were received, we would stop at the local shop in downtown Crystal Lake for general supplies, mostly beer and cigarettes. But in real life, it was just candy, cigarettes, and root beers. The store was the backside of the laundromat. Of course, there would be the encounter with the Doomsday Prophet Ralph, and we would ignore his warnings.
Damn it, Ralph, get out of here. Go on, get. Leave people alone.
You'll never come back again.
Oh, shut up, Ralph.
It's got a death curse.
Why would we listen to him? We were heading to the woods with our super hot girlfriends. The camp was the courtyard in front of the laundromat. The game would last until Jason struck. Then it would disintegrate into an argument about who got to live and who suddenly had karate skills to use against Jason. All the years later, the fantasy of Camp Crystal Lake has not left me. One of the first things I did after I bought my first house was build a theater that was not only dedicated to my love of video stores, but also included a Camp Crystal Lake photo booth. I have also visited the original Friday the 13th filming location, not once but twice. My main goal is to spend the night there in the future. But most amusing of all is how my wife and I have celebrated all of our wedding anniversaries for the last 15 years. Our annual tradition consists of loading up on our favorite movies and TV shows, and a cooler filled with craft beer before I quit drinking. We drive deep into the country, out into the woods, and spend 2 to 3 fun-filled days together at a remote cabin, watching our favorite horror films and playing games like You're the Maniac and the Friday the 13th board game. Thank you for checking out Tales from the Creek Bed. If you enjoyed the show, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment below. Also, please check out my book, The Horror Club, A Trip to the Video Store. It is inspired by stories like the one I just told. Until next time, don't be scared to be you.